29 years of marriage, and the thing that finally breaks you is not always the funeral. It is not always the black suit hanging on the back of a chair, or the flowers that arrive with small white cards written by people who do not know what else to say, or the funeral director lowering his voice every time he says your wife's name as if softness can make death less permanent. Sometimes the thing that breaks you waits until the room is quiet again. Sometimes it waits until the morning after everyone has gone home, when the casserole dishes have been returned, the sympathy cards are stacked in a neat pile, and the house has resumed making its ordinary sounds without the one person who used to belong inside them. For me, it was the Tuesday morning after Sandra's funeral, when I stood in our kitchen on South Race Street and made 2 cups of coffee without thinking. I poured cream into one because Sandra never drank coffee black, stirred it twice because she said once was careless and 3 times was fussy, then turned toward the small breakfast table where she had sat for nearly 3 decades and found only the empty chair facing the window. I stood there holding the mug, steam rising into the pale Denver light. And for the first time since the police call, my body understood what my mind had been refusing to understand. There was nobody to give it to. My name is Kevin James. I teach high school history at South High School in Denver, Colorado. I have taught in the same classroom for 22 years. Not 2, though grief has a way of blurring numbers until entire decades feel strangely compressed. Same second-floor room, same cracked map cabinet, same window facing the parking lot, same posters I keep meaning to replace, same October light that makes the dust above the desks visible during 4th period. Every September, a new crop of students walks through my door convinced that history is useless because everything that matters is happening now. And every May, enough of them leave pretending to believe otherwise that I count the year as a qualified success. It is a modest life, and I do not mean that as a complaint. Some lives are modest because they are small. Mine was modest because it fit. I knew my classroom. I knew the rhythms of school bells and parent conferences and winter break exhaustion. I knew how to explain Reconstruction to 16-year-olds who wanted to be anywhere else. I knew which coffee machine in the teacher's lounge burned the least bitter pot. I knew where my students hid their phones and which ones were pretending not to cry behind sarcasm. I knew my life in the way a man knows a coat he has worn for years. Sandra was not modest. Sandra James was the most interesting person I ever met. And I met her in 1995 at a faculty mixer where she was not faculty, not technically invited, and already dominating the room. She had come as the guest of a colleague from the economics department. And when I first saw her, she was standing near a folding table of lukewarm wine and cubed cheese, arguing with a philosophy professor about the ethics of inheritance. She had that bright, focused look she got when she knew exactly where she was going, and was simply letting everyone else discover it at their own speed. The professor was sweating slightly. Sandra was smiling, not kindly exactly, but with pleasure, the specific pleasure of a woman who enjoyed the architecture of an argument and had no patience for flimsy beams. I introduced myself at the exact point where the philosophy professor began losing visibly. Because if I have ever had one gift besides remembering dates, it has been timing. Sandra turned to me before I could say anything and asked, "Are you going to argue with me too?" I said, "Not until I know what position you want me to take." She laughed. Not politely, fully, like I had surprised her. That laugh was the beginning of everything I understood about my life for the next 29 years. And the beginning of everything I did not understand until after she died. We were different people. I mean that in the way that becomes truer over time, not less. Early in a relationship, difference can feel decorative, like contrast in a room. Later, it becomes structural. I was steady. Sandra was kinetic. I liked habits. Sandra liked systems. I cared about context. Sandra cared about leverage. I loved the quiet satisfaction of teaching students how one century shaped another. Sandra loved walking into rooms full of powerful people, listening for 10 minutes, and locating the hidden fault line nobody else had the courage to name. In the early years, she called her work consulting. Later, as it grew stranger and more demanding, she called it projects, which is the word people use when they do not want to explain a thing at dinner. She traveled 4 or 5 times a year at first, then more. New York, San Francisco, Chicago, sometimes cities she did not name until she returned. She kept her professional life in a separate compartment from our domestic one, with the efficiency of a person who had decided, long before I understood it, That integration was overrated. I respected that because I respected her. I did not ask questions she did not invite. That was, as I would come to understand in the week following her death, both the right choice and the most expensive silence of my life. The call came on Monday, September 16th at 4:47 p.m. I know the exact time because the clock above my classroom door had been running 3 minutes slow all month, and I had just looked at my phone to confirm whether I still had time to finish grading essays before heading home. The classroom was empty. Fifth period prep. A stack of junior essays sat on my desk, each one attempting with varying degrees of sincerity to explain whether industrialization improved or degraded American life. The late afternoon sun slanted through the parking lot window, catching the rear windshields of faculty cars in bright flashes. Then the wall phone rang. Almost nobody used that phone anymore. When it rang, it startled me so badly my elbow knocked the stack of essays to the floor. Paper slid across the linoleum in a white fan. I remember thinking, stupidly, that it must be the office calling about a substitute request or a parent waiting downstairs. I picked up and said, "Kevin James." The man on the other end asked if I was the husband of Sandra James. He identified himself as Officer Greer with the Denver Police Department. His voice was professional and kind in the particular way people are professional and kind when they have already stepped into the room of your life carrying something irreversible. He told me there had been a collision on I-25 southbound near the University Boulevard exit. A silver Lexus SUV. Sandra's plates. A truck had jackknifed after sudden traffic compression. There were other vehicles involved, but the primary impact was hers. He said the paramedics arrived within 4 minutes. He said they did everything possible. He said words that did not belong in a classroom, where I had explained the progressive era that morning. Pronounced at the scene, I sat down on the edge of my desk. The essays lay scattered at my feet. One had a red comment in my handwriting across the margin. "Be specific." Officer Greer asked, "Mr. James, are you still there?" I said, "Yes." It was the only useful word I had left. "I am here." I did not cry in the classroom. I did not stand. I did not hang up right away. I listened to him explain where they had taken her, what would happen next, who would contact me, and how sorry he was. Sorry is such a small word for certain events that it almost becomes ceremonial. I thanked him because manners remain even when meaning has left. Then I placed the receiver back into the cradle carefully, as if putting it down too hard might create another accident somewhere. I called Frank Odom from the parking lot. Frank has been my closest friend since 2003, when we coached Little League together and discovered that both of us believed children should learn how to lose without adults pretending they had won. Frank has the quality of a man who can be reached at any hour and will always answer, not because he has nothing else to do, but because he has decided that answering is part of who he is. He picked up on the first ring. "Kev, what is wrong?" he said, because there are voices people recognize before words arrive. "Sandra," I said, "there was an accident." A pause. "How bad?" I looked across the school parking lot at the line of buses loading students who were laughing, shoving backpacks, living inside a world where September 16th was just Monday. "She is gone," I said. "Frank was at South High in 18 minutes. I know because I counted. Counting things is what I do when the mind needs work. That is not the work it is trying desperately to avoid. I counted parking stripes. I counted blue cars. I counted the minutes between the call and Frank's headlights turning into the lot. When he got out of his truck, he did not ask for details at first. He simply put one hand on my shoulder, not hard, not soft, and stood there beside me until I remembered I had legs. The week that followed was not a blur exactly. People call grief a fog, but the first week after sudden loss is sharper than fog. It is more like a series of disconnected high-definition images after someone has cut out the film between them. I remember the funeral home director's tie, navy with small silver dots. I remember Drew arriving from Colorado Springs with his hair still damp from a shower he must have taken too quickly, his face stunned in a way that made him look 16 again, though he was 31. I remember Amber flying in from Seattle on a red-eye, walking through the front door Tuesday evening, dropping her bag in the hallway and saying, "Where is she?" Though Sandra was not anywhere anymore in the way Amber meant. I remember the three of us moving through the Washington Park house in the orbit of people sharing the same grief, but occupying separate planets. Amber cleaned things that were already clean. Drew stood in the garage for 20 minutes staring at Sandra's gardening glove. I opened the refrigerator 6 times without taking anything out. We touched each other's shoulders. We asked if anyone had eaten. We answered yes when the answer was no. Flowers arrived in waves. Neighbors brought lasagna. Someone from the school brought a tray of sandwiches. The house smelled like lilies and reheated food. And underneath both of those smells, beneath all that ceremonial care, there was Sandra's absence spreading room by room like cold water. The funeral was Saturday, September 21st. Sandra had a lot of friends, more than I knew in some cases, which was a sentence that would change its meaning in the weeks that followed. The service was full. People stood in the back. Colleagues from my school came. Former students sent messages. People from Sandra's professional life arrived in tailored suits, speaking quietly to one another, pausing when I approached, offering condolences with names I recognized only because they offered them. A woman with silver hair and a calm face stood in the third row, watched the entire service without crying, and left before the reception line reached her. I did not know then that her name was Carla Brine. I would remember her later, because grief makes certain strangers glow faintly in memory before you know why. I spoke last. I said the things that were true and safe, because funerals are rarely built for complicated truth. I said Sandra was brilliant, funny in a way that caught you off guard, generous with her attention when she decided you deserved it, and nearly impossible to defeat in an argument once she had taken a position. I told the story of the faculty mixer and the philosophy professor. People laughed. Sandra would have wanted that, I thought. Sandra would have approved of choosing a story where she won. Monday, September 23rd at 9:00 a.m. I was sitting at the kitchen table with 1 cup of coffee. I had made 1 cup deliberately, with the rigid intentionality of a man retraining a muscle that keeps reaching for what is gone. The house was too bright. Denver autumn light came through the window over the sink and touched everything with offensive clarity. There was the fruit bowl Sandra had bought in Santa Fe. There was the small crack in the tile near the stove that she once wanted fixed, and then decided gave the kitchen character. There was the chair she would never sit in again. I had just lifted the mug when the doorbell rang. The man on the porch was around 61, narrow, neat, gray suit, black briefcase. The kind of person whose appearance says official business without revealing which institution owns the authority. He introduced himself as Victor Paulson, a notary and state administrator. "Mr. James," he said, "I apologize for arriving without more notice. I have tried to reach you by phone and email, but given the circumstances, I understand if messages have not been your priority." "They have not," I said. My voice sounded hoarse from days of speaking to people when I wanted silence. "Come in." He sat across from me at the kitchen table where Sandra had sat for 29 years and opened his briefcase with practiced efficiency. He removed a folder. Inside were a deed, a document with a notary seal, and a matte black key card with a small silver marking on the edge. PH2. "Your wife designated me as administrator of a specific asset transfer," Victor said. "She executed this document 14 months ago, with instructions that it be delivered to you personally within 10 days of her death. The transfer was automatic, no probate required. The asset is now titled directly to you." I looked at the key card, then the deed. "What asset?" Victor placed the deed in front of me with both hands. "Spire Tower, 16 Glenarm Place, Denver. Unit PH2. A penthouse." The word did not fit in my kitchen. It sounded like something from someone else's obituary. 2 floors, approximately 3,200 square feet. Your wife purchased it 8 years ago under an LLC. 14 months ago, she transferred sole ownership of the LLC's real property interest to you personally, with instructions for delivery after her death. I stared at the document. There was my name, printed in clean official type beside a property I had never seen, in a building I had walked past downtown without once imagining that my wife owned part of its sky. "She never told me about this," I said. Victor's face remained careful. "I am not in a position to speak to what Mrs. James chose to share." "Why would she do that, Mr. James? My role is administrative." She was very clear and deliberate in her instruction. "She wanted you to have this. While she was alive, she did not want me to know it existed." Victor paused. It was the kind of pause that contains an answer the speaker has been professionally trained not to give. "Contents of the unit and any context surrounding it are not matters I can address." He left 15 minutes later. I remained at the table with the deed, the key card, and my 1 cup of coffee turning cold between my hands. Outside, someone walked a dog past our house. A delivery truck stopped 3 doors down. The world demonstrated, with almost insulting thoroughness, its ability to continue. I touched the black key card with one finger. Sandra, I thought, what is this? Here is what I knew about Sandra's work, which is to say almost nothing, and that nothing had once felt like trust. Around 15 years into our marriage, when her consulting projects had become more substantial and travel more frequent, she sat me down in the living room after Amber and Drew had gone to bed. She did not fidget. Sandra rarely fidgeted. She sat with one leg crossed, hands folded, and spoke with the direct clarity that was one of her defining qualities. Kevin, she said, my work has aspects I cannot fully discuss. I am not going to ask you to be okay with that, because that would be unfair. I am going to ask you to trust me. In return, I can tell you this. We are financially safe. I am doing nothing illegal. Everything I do is because I am building something for us. I asked one question. Are you in danger? She smiled, not dismissively, but with affection. No, I believed her because marriage, real marriage, does not survive on blind faith. It survives on accumulated evidence. On the 37 times, someone told the truth. Before the 38th time, you cannot verify it. On the record of who they have shown themselves to be. Sandra had been complicated, yes, private, yes, fiercely self-contained. But she had never been careless with our children, never reckless with money, never cruel with my trust. So I trusted her. For 14 more years, I did not ask again. And now, with a key card to a penthouse lying beside my dead wife's coffee mug, I was beginning to understand that trust had been warranted. But silence leaves rooms behind it. And some rooms are built high above the city with your name quietly waiting on the deed. I told Frank that evening at his house on Capitol Hill. We sat in his living room, the one with too many books, and one old leather chair nobody sits in because it belonged to his father. He put a beer in my hand, and I held it without drinking. I described Victor Paulson, the deed, the key card, the building. Frank listened without interrupting. He is good at listening, not in the passive way people wait for their turn, but in the active way of a man holding the frame of a room steady, while another man tries not to come apart inside. When I finished, he looked at the key card on the coffee table. You have not gone yet. No, you are afraid of what is in there. I do not know what I am. That usually means afraid. I leaned back and closed my eyes. It has been 4 days since the funeral. I found out this morning that my wife owned a 2-floor penthouse downtown for 8 years, and apparently decided I should inherit it after she died like a plot device in a bad novel. I am allowed to be a little delayed. Frank nodded. You are. He picked up the key card and turned it between his fingers. You think it is bad. I think Sandra had reasons for everything she did. Always. That does not mean her reasons will feel good from where I am standing. You think there was someone else? The question entered the room and stayed there. I had not allowed myself to form it fully until he said it. A penthouse, a secret professional life, business trips, a woman I knew completely and did not know at all. The mind, once invited toward suspicion, can furnish entire houses in seconds. I pictured Sandra unlocking that door with someone beside her. I pictured glasses on a table, a bed, a life she had not brought home. Then, almost immediately, I hated myself for imagining it and hated her for making the imagining possible. I do not know, I said. Frank's expression softened. You should call Ruth. Ruth Calloway was my attorney, a real estate and estate lawyer in Lodoo who had handled our Washington Park house documents and basic estate planning. Sharp, direct, the kind of lawyer who tells you the truth before you can dress it in a more comfortable coat. Tomorrow morning, I said. Good. Frank set the key card back on the table. Whatever it is, Kev, she planned the transfer. Legal, documented, personal delivery. She wanted you to have it, not the kids, not some business partner, not a trust. That is supposed to comfort me. No, Frank said. It is supposed to keep you from deciding what it means before you see it. I drove home later through streets Sandra, and I had driven together for decades. Denver looked indifferent and familiar. At home, I made tea because making coffee at night felt like inviting the morning back too soon. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the key card again. PH2. Sandra, I thought again, what did you build? Ruth Calloway's office was in Lodoo on Wazzy Street, in one of those old warehouse buildings that now house attorneys, architects, and businesses that appreciate exposed brick as evidence of taste. Her office was on the 3rd floor with a window overlooking the Union Station Plaza. She had the deed and LLC documents printed and marked in front of her when I arrived Tuesday morning. I had scanned and emailed everything the night before, and she had responded at 11 p.m. with only 6 words, reviewed, legally clean, come at 9s. Ruth is 58. with short dark hair threaded with gray and the kind of no-nonsense presence that makes people sit straighter without realizing it. She did not offer me false warmth. She offered coffee, condolences, and information in that order. "The transfer is clean," she said, tapping the deed. The LLC structure was proper. The real property interest transferred validly. No liens, no title disputes, no probate complication. Property taxes, maintenance fees, and building assessments have been paid on time every quarter for 8 years. The penthouse was purchased outright. "Outright," I repeated. "No mortgage? None." "How much?" Ruth checked the document, though I suspected she already knew. "Purchase price 8 years ago was $1.4 million. Current estimated value, based on comparable Spire Tower penthouse sales, between $1 and $3 million. I looked past her through the office window at people crossing the plaza below, carrying coffee, rolling luggage, living in the ordinary scale of Tuesday. Sandra owned a $2 million apartment and never told me. "Yes." Ruth did not soften it. "What does the LLC list as its business purpose?" "Consulting and advisory services." "That is vague." Deliberately, she folded her hands. "Kevin, there is a registered agent and business contact listed for related filing. Carla Brine. Her name appears several times in connection with Sandra's LLC history." "I have never heard that name." Ruth watched me carefully. "That may be significant, or it may only mean Sandra kept her professional compartment sealed." "Compartment?" The word scraped against me. Everyone keeps using words that make secrecy sound architectural. "Because sometimes it is." She slid the key card back toward me. "I recommend seeing the penthouse before you make any decision, and I recommend calling me before you sign, sell, discard, confront, or promise anything. You think I am walking into something." I think Sandra James was careful. People like that do not leave physical spaces and documents behind by accident. She paused. "Whatever is in there, she intended you to find it." The drive from Ruth's office to Spire Tower should have taken 6 minutes. I drove it twice because the first time I pulled into a loading zone and sat there with both hands on the steering wheel until a delivery driver knocked on my window and asked, not unkindly, if I planned to move. That is what grief does to situational awareness. Your eyes see the city, but your mind is running a louder program underneath. Spire Tower stood on Glenarm Place, glass and steel rising into a Denver sky too clear for the state of my life. 42 stories, secured garage, dormant, lobby with stone floors, muted lighting, and furniture nobody would ever choose for comfort, but everyone would recognize as expensive. It was not ostentatious, exactly. It was worse. It was assured, the kind of building that does not need to prove wealth, because the monthly assessments already do. I had never been inside it. Tess Merrow, the building manager, met me in the lobby at 10. She was in her mid-40s, professional, warm in a measured way, wearing the expression of someone who had been briefed enough to know this was delicate, but not enough to know what wound she was pressing near. "Mr. James," she said, offering her hand, "I am very sorry for your loss. We were all fond of Mrs. James here." The sentence stopped me. "She was here often." Tess's expression adjusted. "She was a regular presence. We respected her privacy, as we do with all residents." "Of course," I said, because people say things like "of course" when nothing is obvious at all. "The penthouse is on 42. I can take you up or you may go alone." "Alone," I said. The elevator required the key card. The doors closed around me in mirrored silence, and as the numbers climbed, I watched my own face become stranger floor by floor. Funeral face, widower face, husband of a woman who had owned the top of a building and had not told him. The elevator rose smoothly, but inside me something descended. 42 opened onto a short carpeted hallway with only 2 doors, PH1 and PH2. And a window at the far end looking west toward the front range. Even from the hallway, the view was extraordinary. The city grid below, the mountains beyond, the light sharpened by altitude. I stood in front of PH2 with the key card in my hand and heard Frank's voice in memory. "She thought you could handle it." I placed the card against the reader. The light went green. The lock clicked. I opened the door. The penthouse entered me in fragments, because the mind cannot take in the unknown all at once. Floor-to-ceiling windows along the western wall. A living area larger than the first apartment Sandra and I rented together. A kitchen with stone counters, quiet appliances, and copper pans that looked used but perfectly maintained. A staircase leading to a second level. Bookshelves built into the wall near the windows. A large gray sectional facing the mountain. A vase with dried branches on a low table, No dust, no stale smell. This was not storage. This was a place someone had inhabited regularly, carefully, with intention. Then I saw the woman sitting on the couch, silver hair cut short, blazer, slacks, reading glasses, folder on her lap. She looked up when the door opened, and her expression was not surprise. It was the look of someone who has been waiting for something she was not sure would happen, and now must step into the shape of it. She stood slowly. "Mr. James," she said, "I am Carla Brine." For 4 seconds, everything inside me stopped moving. Ruth's unknown name, the woman from the funeral's 3rd row, Sandra's secret penthouse, a stranger waiting inside it with a folder. "How did you get in?" I asked. My voice was calm. I teach teenagers who think they are clever. I have spent 22 years learning to keep my voice level, while my interior gathers evidence. "Sandra gave me a key," Carla said. "I have had one for 8 years. I came to collect certain documents before the transfer was fully completed. I should have called. I am sorry. Who are you?" She held the folder in both hands, not defensively but formally, as if presenting herself to a court. "I was Sandra's business partner, her primary one for the last 11 years. Business partner? Yes. In what business?" Carla drew a slow breath. "Corporate intelligence and transition strategy. Consulting, but not in the casual sense. Sensitive advisory work for companies in distress. Leadership disputes. Hostile board situations, regulatory exposure, merger destabilization. Sandra was one of the best I have ever seen." I stared at her. "She used this place for work?" "Mostly. Meetings, research, client briefings, sometimes strategy sessions. The confidentiality requirements were intense. This was neutral ground she controlled entirely." I looked around the room again, and every object rearranged itself. Not a love nest, then. Not necessarily. A professional space. A command center. A hidden version of my wife with better furniture than our actual house. And a view she never described. Relief came first, so fast it almost weakened my knees. Then anger, because relief is not forgiveness. "She told you I did not know." "Yes." "Did she tell you why she did not tell me?" Carla's face changed, not with pity, but with respect for the difficulty of the answer. "She said you were the most honest and uncomplicated person she had ever known, and she meant that as the highest compliment. She said her work required contained knowledge. Need to know. She believed you did not need to know because it would only make you worry in ways she could not manage." "That sounds like Sandra." "It was. It also sounds convenient." Carla nodded once. "It was that too." I sat in the chair opposite the couch, because standing had begun to feel theatrical. "Tell me what she did." "Not the broad category, the actual work." Carla sat too, opened the folder, and began. She spoke with the precision of someone who had prepared to make the invisible visible. Sandra was hired by companies that had lost the ability to read themselves. That was how Carla put it. In distress, organizations lied, not always deliberately but structurally. Executives protected territory. Boards misread loyalty as competence. Founders mistook control for vision. Legal departments hid risk inside language. Sandra could walk into a room, listen to 6 people describe the same problem, and identify which person was actually describing the truth by what they omitted. She built maps of influence. She assessed leadership fractures. She advised on succession, containment, negotiation, sometimes removal. She understood power emotionally, Carla said, not theoretically. She knew how people behaved when they were cornered, flattered, afraid, underestimated. She could see where the official chart differed from the real one. I listened, and the woman being described was unquestionably Sandra, yet she was Sandra at a scale I had never been permitted to see. My wife, who argued at faculty mixers and remembered every birthday and hated when cabinet doors were left open, had apparently spent 11 years walking into corporate crises and changing outcomes worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The fees, I asked, because at some point numbers become the only way to understand size. Carla slid a page across the coffee table. This is a summary, not client names. Those remain confidential. But revenue, distributions, retained assets, and investments. I looked at the page. Then I looked again, because the first look produced a number that did not belong in the life of a high school history teacher with a 10-year-old Subaru and a pension spreadsheet in a kitchen drawer. She cleared this. In strong years, Carla said. Yes, Sandra told me we were financially safe. Carla's mouth moved in the faintest sad smile. Sandra had a gift for understatement when understatement served privacy. We talked for 2 hours. Carla told me what she could, and refused what she could not. That, more than anything, made me trust her. People eager to earn trust often overshare. Carla did not. She explained the mechanics of Sandra's LLC, the separation of client money, the legal documentation, the accountants, the attorneys, the compliance structure. Everything had been legal. Everything had been careful. Sandra had apparently been as meticulous in secrecy as she had been in everything else. Carla spoke of a pharmaceutical company whose board had nearly imploded during a regulatory crisis, a regional bank merger weakened by old loyalties, a technology founder being maneuvered out by investors who understood his shares, but not his symbolic value. She never named them. Sandra loved it, Carla said, not sentimentally. Factually, she would come alive inside complexity. She used to say your work and hers were opposites. You taught the same truth to new people every year. She solved new lies with the same toolkit every time. She talked about my teaching. Often, Carla looked at me. She was proud of you. The words arrived unexpectedly, and I had to look away toward the mountains. She said you were grounded, that you made everything else possible because you were always exactly who you said you were. I sat with that. Compliment and indictment braided together. I had been her ground. She had built in the air. Why the penthouse? I asked. Carla closed the folder. Practical reasons. Neutral meeting space. Controlled environment. Appreciation value. Privacy. And I think, personally, she liked having a space that belonged entirely to her professional self. Not wife, not mother, not your student's missus, James at school events, not the woman hosting Thanksgiving, just Sandra. Was she unhappy? Carla's answer came quickly. No, then after a pause. Not in the way you are asking. She loved you. She loved your children. This was not running from you. It was expansion. Compartmentalized, yes. Imperfect, definitely, but not rejection. It was the most comforting and least comforting thing anyone could have said. Before leaving, Carla handed me a second folder. Sandra prepared this 14 months ago, when she executed the transfer. She told me that if something happened and you came here, I should give it to you. She knew I would come. She hoped you would. What is in it? A letter. Financial summary. Contacts. One warning. A warning? Carla's expression hardened slightly for the first time. Read page 4 before you answer calls from anyone named Gordon Hale. I almost laughed because the name sounded too theatrical for real life, and yet nothing about my life had felt realistically proportioned since Monday. Carla gave me her card, shook my hand, and left. The door closed behind her with a soft click. I was alone in my wife's secret penthouse, holding a folder she had built for my future. There is a specific quality to reading words written by someone who is dead. Not emails or grocery lists or old birthday cards. Those were written for a living moment, without the burden of finality. A letter prepared 14 months before death, written with the possibility that it may become the last direct communication between two people, carries a different gravity. Every sentence feels chosen under a pressure you cannot relieve. I sat on Sandra's gray sectional with the mountains framed beyond the glass and opened the folder. Her handwriting was on the first page. Neat, deliberate cursive, kind people used to learn, and nobody seems to anymore. Kevin, if you are reading this, then something happened, and I was not there to explain it myself. I am sorry for that. I am sorry for the shock, for the silence, for the locked compartments, for every year you trusted me without knowing the full shape of what you were trusting. I know you will ask yourself whether you were foolish. You were not. You trusted the woman you knew. The hard truth is that you knew me truly, but not completely. And I let that be enough because it was easier than asking you to live beside the complications I chose. The work was real. Carla will tell you what she can, and what she tells you is accurate. I will not insult you by pretending. I kept it from you for your benefit alone. Some of it was protection, some of it was practicality, some of it was ego, some of it was cowardice. I needed something that belonged entirely to the self I was before I was wife and mother and hostess and neighbor, and the woman who remembered which student of yours had lost a parent that year. I loved that life, Kevin. I chose it. I chose you. But I also wanted a room of my own at the top of the city, where nobody needed me to be softer than I was. None of this was a rejection of you. Not 1 minute. You were the one I chose in 1995, and you were still the one I chose every morning after, even when I left for airports and meetings and rooms I did not describe. You gave me steadiness without demanding ownership. You may not know how rare that is. I knew. I counted on it. Sometimes I abused it. I am sorry. Now the practical things, because I know you, And eventually grief will need a list. The penthouse is yours. Sell it, keep it, let Amber and Drew use it. Sit in it and hate me for a while if that is what you need. The accounts and LLC summaries are enclosed. Ruth Calloway has a sealed envelope with access information. I left it with her 6 months ago. Page 4 matters. Read it carefully before you speak with anyone about Gordon Hale. I loved you every complicated, compartmentalized, imperfect day of our life. Every day, Kevin. Still you. Always you. Sandra. I read the letter once, then again. I did not cry in the dramatic way people might expect. The first 2 days had taken the easy tears, the acute ones, the body's emergency release. This was past crying. This was information entering bone. She chose me, I thought. She hid from me. She trusted me. She used me. She protected me. She loved me. All of those things sat together, refusing to cancel one another out. I wanted to be angry enough to simplify her. I could not. Sandra had always defeated simple categories. Death had not changed that. Page 4 was short. 3 paragraphs. Gordon Hale, silent partner in an adjacent LLC, connected to Sandra's early consulting work. Seed capital in exchange for minority participation in future earning. Documented, legal, paid, terminated 18 months earlier, with full return and signed acknowledgement. Gordon will likely contact you, she wrote. He may imply he has a claim on the penthouse, the LLC, or associated asset. He does not. Do not engage emotionally. Do not negotiate. Conrad Marsh has the documentation. Call him. Gordon is not a good man to do business with, and I regret that I did not see it sooner. He will try to make you feel uninformed. You will not be uninformed once you speak to Conrad. Trust yourself. You have always been smarter than you think. I sat back with the page in my hand. Even dead, Sandra was moving pieces in a room I had not known existed. At 2:15 p.m., I called Ruth from the penthouse. She left a letter, I said. She mentioned your envelope. Ruth exhaled. I have it. She instructed me not to open or release it until you called from the penthouse. Why from here specifically? She said if you called from there, it meant you had entered the space, met whoever was there, and read the letter. She wanted you to have context before numbers. Numbers, look at page 3. Bottom line, I turned to the financial summary. I found the total. I stared at it. The number did not belong to my life. It belonged to another category of existence entirely. A category with advisors, foundations, estate managers, and quiet meetings in offices like Ruth's. This is real. Yes, Ruth said. Her voice was steady in the way professionals sound, when they have had time to absorb what you are absorbing for the first time. Sandra was very successful. She told me we were financially safe. That was true. That was not the whole truth. Also true. I pressed my fingers against the page. What do I do? First, you call Conrad Marsh. Second, you say nothing substantive to Gordon Hale if he reaches out. Third, you do not make any decisions while you are still emotionally inside the discovery. Ruth. Yes, I do not know who I was married to. A long pause. Then she said, you knew who you were married to. You are now learning how much more there was. Gordon Hale called at 4:30 that afternoon while I was sitting in the Spire Tower parking garage, engine off, folder on the passenger seat. I let it go to voicemail. His message was smooth, warm, and manufactured with expert care. He expressed condolences. He said he and Sandra had enjoyed a long-standing business relationship. He said there were a few matters of mutual interest that would need to be handled with discretion and maturity. He said he would hate for uncertainty to make a difficult time harder. There was something in that sentence. Not threat, not openly, but pressure disguised as concern. I forwarded the voicemail to Ruth, then called Conrad Marsh. Conrad was 60, corporate efficient, and already prepared because, of course, Sandra had prepared him. He walked me through Gordon Hale's entire history in 45 minutes. Initial investment, quarterly distributions, amendments, termination, signed acknowledgement, full liquidation. No claim, no ambiguity. Then why is he calling? I asked. Because he believes grief makes people easier to confuse, Conrad said. He assumes you did not know Sandra's business. He assumes you will feel embarrassed, overwhelmed, and eager to make unpleasant conversations disappear. He has tested estate beneficiaries before. Tested. That is the polite word. What is the impolite word? Prayed. The word settled coldly. At last, a villain clear enough to dislike without complication. I returned Gordon's call the next day, Wednesday, September 25th. He answered as though he had been expecting me. His voice carried the relaxed authority of a man, accustomed to being received as important. Kevin, he said, as if we were already on first-name terms. I am so sorry about Sandra. Truly, she was remarkable. Yes, I said. She was. I imagine you're discovering quite a bit. A soft laugh. Sandra did love her privacy. It was one of the things that made working with her both impressive and, at times, challenging. There are matters between us that I think you may not fully understand yet. I understand enough to give you a phone number. Silence. Not long but present. Who's Conrad Marsh? He has the full documentation, including your signed termination acknowledgement. The warmth left Gordon's voice so subtly that someone less attentive might have missed. But I have taught adolescents for decades. I know when a mask changes shape. I am not sure what Sandra may have told you. She wrote it down 14 months ago. Another pause. This one colder. Kevin, these arrangements can be more nuanced than documents suggest. Then Conrad will enjoy nuance. I gave him the number. Do not call me again directly. For the first time, Gordon stopped sounding polished. You may want to be careful about inheriting confidence you have not earned. There it was, the knife under the napkin. My hand tightened around the phone. Sandra's sentence came back to me. He will try to make you feel uninformed. Mr. Hale, I said, I teach history to teenagers. I know what it sounds like when someone who has lost the argument starts attacking the reader. Then I hung up. I sat in my kitchen afterward shaking. Not from fear exactly, but from delayed recognition. Sandra had not left me only assets. She had left me opponents. I told Amber, and Drew that evening on a video call from the Washington Park kitchen. I did not start with the number. I started with the penthouse, then Carla, then the letters, then the business. I watched their faces shift through disbelief, hurt, fascination, and grief acquiring a new dimension. Drew leaned back from his camera, as if distance from the screen might make the information less dense. Amber remained very still, which with Amber means she is doing the most emotional work in the room. When I finally told them the bottom line value from page 3, Drew said nothing for almost 10 seconds. Then quietly, Dad, that is insane. Yes, Mom was doing all of this, apparently, and we did not know. Amber's voice was flat, not accusing exactly, but flattened by the impact. No, did she not trust us? Drew asked. I think she trusted us with one version of her life, I said, and kept another version separate. That sounds like something people say when they are hurt and trying to be fair, Amber said. I looked at her through the screen. It is. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. I keep thinking about all those trips. I used to imagine her in hotel bars drinking wine and being bored. I never imagined she was in boardrooms moving invisible money around. Not money exactly. Power then. Amber wiped one tear quickly. That sounds more like Mom. We sat with that, 3 people discovering that the woman we mourned had left behind not a secret affair, not a scandal, but a secret magnitude. It still hurt. Maybe it hurt more because it was admirable. Betrayal is easier to arrange in the mind when it is ugly. Sandra's secret was brilliant, disciplined, legal, purposeful, and still a locked door she had chosen not to open for us while she lived. Are you selling the penthouse? Drew asked. I thought of the gray couch, the mountains, the letter in my hand. Not yet. Amber leaned closer to the screen. She wanted you to stand in it. What? Mom knew you. She knew numbers would not make it real. She gave you a place, something physical, something with a view. She wanted you to understand by standing inside it. I stared at my daughter, 29 years old and suddenly carrying both her mother's perceptiveness and my patience in one devastating expression. I think you are right, I said. Detective Ray Grover entered the story in early October. Not dramatically, but with the bureaucratic inevitability that follows large insurance policies. He called regarding a routine investigation into Sandra's accident claim. Standard procedure, he said, given policy size and the complexity of her business interest. He was courteous, not suspicious exactly, but trained to let silence work. He asked about Sandra's schedule, travel, stress, possible dispute. He asked whether anyone might benefit unusually from her death. I almost laughed, but grief had made laughter unreliable. Detective, I said, I am learning that my wife arranged almost everything in her life more thoroughly than most people arrange taxes. If you need business documents, call Conrad Marsh. If you need estate records, call Ruth Calloway. If you need me to tell you whether Sandra would deliberately drive into a truck on I-25, the answer is no. He paused. I did not mean to imply that. I know what you meant to ask. He closed the investigation within 3 weeks. Accident, nothing more, nothing less. The clean finality of that should have helped. It did not. A conspiracy would have given my mind something to fight. An accident only gave me absence. I returned to South High on October 14th, the Monday after fall break. My classroom smelled exactly the same: old books, dry erase markers, dust, and the faint industrial cleaner the custodians used on the floor. My students were unusually quiet the first week. Not theatrically, decently. Teenagers are more capable of gentleness than adults give them credit for, especially when they sense that performance would be cruel. A girl in third period left a card on my desk signed by the class. A boy who had never turned in homework on time handed me 3 missing assignments without commentary. During fifth period, I began the unit on the Gilded Age: industrial expansion, self-made wealth, corporate consolidation, the ethics of accumulation. I have taught that unit for years with academic distance. That October, every lecture seemed to return to Sandra. Carnegie, Rockefeller, Pullman, Morgan, systems built behind public narratives. Wealth accumulated through structures invisible to the people living ordinary lives around them. Power, I told my juniors one morning, writing the word on the board, is often less visible than authority. Authority tells you who is supposed to be in charge. Power tells you who actually changes the outcome. I stopped with the marker still in my hand because I heard Sandra in the sentence. The students waited. I turned back to them and continued. Penthouse became a place I visited without knowing why. At first, I told myself it was practical. There were documents to review, drawers to inspect, files Carla had labeled for me: maintenance decisions, insurance, tax implication. But after the practical work ended, I still went. Sometimes after school, still wearing my tie, I would drive downtown, take the elevator to 42, open the door, and stand in the quiet. Sandra's professional life remained in traces: a fountain pen in the desk drawer, a legal pad with one sentence written across the top: people defend the story that lets them sleep. 3 blazers in the upstairs closet, a pair of black heels beneath them, a mug in the kitchen cabinet from a conference in San Diego. No photographs of us, which hurt the first time I noticed. Then, on my 4th visit, I found one in the drawer of the side table beside the couch. It was from our 20th anniversary. Sandra and me on the porch of the Washington Park house, her head tilted toward my shoulder, both of us laughing at something outside the frame. She had kept it there, hidden but near the place where she sat facing the mountain. That discovery did make me cry. Not loudly, not beautifully. I sat on the floor beside the open drawer and cried like a tired man whose anger had run out and left him with love again. Frank came for dinner the Friday of my first week back at school. We sat at the Washington Park kitchen table, Sandra's table, with Sandra's herb garden visible through the rattling window she refused to replace, because she liked the sound in the wind. Frank brought wine. I made pasta badly because Sandra had always claimed I overcooked it, and she was right. How was the first week? He asked. Strange, useful strange, or terrible strange? Both. And the Penthouse? I looked at my plate. I keep going there. That makes sense, does it? She left part of herself there. I drank some wine. She left part of herself everywhere. That is the problem. Frank nodded slowly. Are you going to keep it? For now. Good. Amber thinks we should use it as a family place when people visit Denver. Drew likes the idea. Better than hotels. Sandra would like that. I looked toward the empty chair by the window. I think so. We were quiet. The house seemed to listen with us. After a while, Frank asked, Kev, are you okay? Honestly, I thought about saying yes, because yes is efficient and friends who ask deserve mercy. But Frank deserved truth. I do not know. I am financially fine in a way that feels obscene. I have a penthouse I did not know existed. My dead wife left me a letter that made me love her and resent her in the same paragraph. A man named Gordon Hale tried to scare me and failed only because Sandra taught me from the grave where the exits were. My children are grieving someone they now realize they did not fully know. I am teaching the Gilded Age while privately living inside the footnotes of my own marriage. Frank held his glass and waited. So I said, I am not okay, but I am functioning. Maybe that is the honest stage before okay. Frank lifted his glass. To functioning, I lifted mine. We did not pretend it was a toast to healing. By late October, the leaves around Washington Park had turned gold, and Denver carried that honest cold Sandra used to love. She always said October was the best month because it did not flatter you. Nothing pretending to be warmer than it was. Nothing dressing itself up as spring. Just brightness, cooling air, and the truth of ending. I thought about that often. I thought about what it means to be honest. Sandra had been honest in some ways, with almost brutal consistency. She told me she could not fully discuss her work. She told me to trust her. She told me we were safe. She told me nothing illegal. She told me she was building something for us. Every statement was true. Not complete, but true. That was the difficult part. The part that kept grief from turning neatly into anger. Lies create one kind of damage. Partial truths create another. They leave you arguing with the architecture of what was omitted. On the last Sunday of October, I went to the Penthouse alone just before sunset. I had not planned to stay long, but the light over the mountains caught me. It spread across the western windows in red and gold bands, turning the city below into something almost unreal. I stood where Sandra must have stood hundreds of times and imagined her there, phone in hand, mind moving through crises I never knew existed. I imagined her looking out at the same mountains after advising boards and dismantling lies, then returning home to ask me whether I wanted soup or leftover. I imagined the loneliness of that separation, but also the freedom. I could resent it and still see its beauty. That was the cruelty of loving a complicated person after they are gone. Death does not let you ask follow-up questions. It only hands you evidence and leaves you to interpret. I opened the desk drawer and found the legal pad again. People defend the story that lets them sleep. Beneath that page was another, blank except for a date, 14 months before the accident. The same week she transferred the Penthouse. I wondered whether she had known something was changing in her. Not death, not specifically, but the sense people sometimes get that what they have built must be ordered before time reveals its own opinion. Sandra had not expected I-25. Nobody expects the ordinary road to become the final one. But she had expected that eventually the locked compartments would outlive her unless she built a bridge. The bridge was imperfect. It was late. It hurt to cross, but it was there. I kept the Penthouse, not as an escape, not exactly as a shrine. Shrines require a cleaner kind of devotion than I had. I kept it because selling it too quickly would have felt like refusing the last complex thing Sandra asked me to hold. Amber came to Denver in November and stayed there for 3 nights instead of in the Washington Park house. She said the space felt like meeting a version of her mother who never packed school lunches or reminded her to send thank-you cards. Drew came in December and stood at the window for 20 minutes without speaking. Then he said she was kind of terrifying, wasn't she? I said, yes. He nodded. I like that. We laughed, but not because it was funny. Because laughter is one of the ways a family tests whether the floor still holds. Gordon Hale never called again. Conrad sent one formal letter. Ruth received no further claims. Carla and I met twice more. Once to close out certain client communications, and once because I asked her to tell me something about Sandra that did not appear in documents. Carla thought for a long time, then said, she hated being underestimated, but she loved when people underestimated her because it gave her room. That was Sandra. A contradiction sharpened into method. Winter came. The Washington Park house grew quieter in a way I no longer fought every hour. I still made 2 cups of coffee sometimes. Less often, but it happened. When it did, I no longer stood holding the second mug like a man discovering grief for the first time. I poured it out, rinsed the cup, and sat down with mine. That was not healing. Not exactly. It was repetition becoming survivable. At school, my students moved from industrialization to imperialism. From imperialism to World War I. History doing what history always does, refusing to stop at any one person's catastrophe. At night, I sorted Sandra's things slowly. I kept her scarves. I donated most of her business suits from the Washington Park closet. The blazers in the Penthouse stayed. I could not say why, except that they belonged to the part of her I had met too late, and I was not ready to empty that room. The full truth is this: Sandra loved me. Sandra hid from me. Sandra protected me. Sandra used my steadiness as cover for her velocity. Sandra built wealth I never imagined and left it in my hands with instructions written in love, strategy, apology, and control. Sandra was the most interesting person I ever met, and even dead, she remained ahead of me by several moves. There is no clean moral to that, no simple lesson about trust or secrecy or marriage. There is only the life we had, the life she had adjacent to it, and the strange inheritance of learning both after the chance to ask her why had passed forever. The Penthouse is still on the 42nd floor. The view is still extraordinary. Sometimes I go there after school when the sky is clear, and the mountains look close enough to accuse. I stand at the western window and watch Denver darken into lights. Below me, traffic moves along streets Sandra knew, and did not explain. Somewhere south, my classroom waits with its maps and desks and essays. Somewhere east, the Washington Park house holds the quieter half of our marriage. I am financially safe, exactly as she promised. More than safe, absurdly safe, but safety is not the same as peace, and inheritance is not the same as answer. I used to think the dead left behind memories. Sandra left behind systems, documents, keys, warnings, a room above the city where her hidden life still seems to breathe when the evening light touches the glass. Sometimes when I am alone up there, I say, "Well done, Sandra." I say it with love. I say it with anger. I say it because both are true, and because after 29 years, I owe her the honesty of complexity. Then I stand in the silence she built for herself and left to me, looking at the mountains until the last light goes out, understanding that the Tuesday morning after the funeral did not break me because she was gone. It broke me because I thought absence was the whole loss. I did not know yet that grief had another door behind it. I did not know she had left me a key.